You've just entered the Extra Zone Arcade. Last time we left off with the Sonic timeline, we covered prehistoric and ancient events from the Ancients' arrival on Earth all the way up to the Black Arms planting a ship on the Earth, ready for their invasion. So go check out that first part if you haven't already. I also explained there what games and media I'm taking into account for this timeline, which did take up a good chunk of the video last time. Not doing that again here. With all that said, let's dust off our books again as we cover the events in what I call contemporary history. All the stuff that happened within the last 100 years before Sonic appears. Starting with arguably the biggest and most important set of events yet. A half-century before the present day lived Professor Gerald Robotnik. He was without a doubt the greatest scientific mind in the world, the latest in a long lineage of geniuses. He had it all: fame, wealth, and a family that loved him, all in his pursuit to bring happiness and hope to humanity. His love for archaeology and robotics led him to many interesting discoveries in his time. One such discovery was a mysterious floating paradise, which he pinpointed the location of using a ring found in a Mystic Ruins jungle dig site. Making his way up to the island, he was stunned to find such a spectacle, and most curious of all his discoveries was a shrine that housed what looked like a massive Chaos Emerald. As it turns out, this is the legendary Master Emerald. His stay was brief, and he didn't run into any inhabitants, but he did make sure to take in all the culture as much as possible. His granddaughter Maria had just been born at the time, and he knew he was going to dedicate everything he did to her, including helping construct the Earth's first orbital space colony, which he christened the Ark. His grand design was to have it be a vessel of hope and peace for future generations, though there would be a catch to this. Along with the United Federation, the global military organization known as GUN, or Guardian Units of Nations, were funding this project. They requested research and development of weapons, which Gerald wasn't too fond of. He wanted to save lives, not end them. The vessel was now finally fully complete and ready for launch, where shortly after, a Chaos Emerald was acquired. These gems had the capability to bend space-time, which intrigued Gerald to no end. While experimenting on the artifact, he accidentally opened a portal to a ruined dimension, known as the Chaotic Inferno. Soon enough, he encountered the beast that ruined that world, the Ifrit. He hurriedly made his notes and was able to escape the creature's wrath with his life, sealing up the dimensional rift to ensure it doesn't come through to our world. Soon after, Gerald came in contact with a specimen recovered by one of his sons in an ancient warehouse. He was quite the archaeologist and was the father of young Maria. His brother, on the other hand, was a robotics expert. Both of them a chip off the old block, as they say. The puppet-like specimen one of his sons found turned out to use the power of the Chaos Emeralds. This resulted in some of the earlier experiments that took place on the Ark, as Gerald learned the possibility that due to its age and latent power, this machine might have been responsible for the destruction of the Fourth Great Civilization. Gerald began to notice the robot was watching and then copying his every move. So, more time was spent researching and uncovering just what this being is. The sheer amount of data compiled from his scans caused his most powerful computer to crash, with the most intriguing data being about melee combat and weapons of the time of the android's creation. Gerald started to become horrified at the prospect of it becoming fully functional again, noting that if it's able to recreate the combat and weaponry data it once had, or God forbid absorb any modern weaponry, it could destroy everything. By this point, a few years had passed. Not long after the launch of the Ark, Gerald was informed that Maria had fallen ill with a disease. She just now received a diagnosis of neuroimmunodeficiency syndrome, or NIDS for short. Gerald had her brought to the Ark, where the low-gravity environment would keep her symptoms in remission while he works on a cure. Her family wasn't on board with the idea, but Maria quickly adapted to her surroundings and made friends with everyone there, namely, a young boy named Abraham Tower. They became like siblings during their time there. The president of the United Federation had been pressing Gerald all this time about unlocking immortality, with the professor believing they were just chasing a shadow. However, he hoped with the president's funding and clout that a cure for the ailing Maria could be found quickly. Soon enough, Gunn's demands also became heavier: research weapons or they pull funding. This led him to dig up records from his time researching in the Mystic Ruins. Records of an ancient god of destruction named Chaos. The legendary beast of water would serve as the basis for new AI-controlled weapons, which would hopefully satisfy the military. Though Gerald hopes these artificial chaos could be used as search and rescue units. Research into the president's requested immortality would then begin, codenamed Project Shadow. He named it this due to the absurdity of the concept of eternal life. So, he learned how to siphon the energy of the Chaos Emeralds and apply it into living tissue. And then, the Chaos Drives were developed, in hopes that interfacing with the Emeralds would bring promising results. Now begin the trials, where Gerald opted to use salamanders for their regenerative abilities. They would be exposed to the Chaos Drives, which were now also being supplied to Gunn in order to keep them off the professor's back. He despises the idea of powering these war machines, but it's all in the name of saving Maria and bringing hope to the world. Eventually, Gerald's attempt at creating the ultimate creature would reach its frustrating limits. The subject began to grow at an accelerated rate, so much that it couldn't support its own vitals. A life support rig was created to keep the creature stable, but it would need constant maintenance to keep up with its growth. It's become restless and is producing wild, energetic reactions, possibly a result of the Emerald's power. Could something like this even be controlled? As Gerald mulled this over, the creature was kept in a remote remote area of the Ark so it could live as comfortably as it could. A few more years have passed, and while Gerald continued his research ceaselessly, Maria has grown even more. Still that beacon of positivity for all those around her in spite of her internal struggles. She has good days and some where the pain takes hold, but through it all, she believes her grandpa will save her. She has faith in Project Shadow. It's been such a long time now that her family back on Earth has become despondent. Feeling the pressure all around, from the president to the military to Maria's illness and her family's lack of faith, Gerald became desperate. This is when the Black Comet that orbits Earth every 50 years made its rounds again, and on board was the Black Arms and Black Doom himself, ready to invade. His first stop would be the Curious Colony, where he met with the professor himself and expressed his interest in his experiments. This ultimate life seemed promising. The professor was surprised to find that Doom had knowledge of the emeralds, and the alien would offer his DNA in exchange for a vessel that would assist in his conquest. Gerald accepted the deal and began to engineer a bipedal hedgehog-like creature, perfectly capable of interacting with the Chaos energy, no doubt inspired by his excursion to Angel Island. Gunn wants undying soldiers, and Black Doom a herald for his invasion, in which he plans to use the specimen as a vessel for destruction. Gerald would play them all for fools. It was Maria's naming of Shadow that gave Gerald a new perspective on his purpose. A shadow tells you which way to go to find the light. Now filled with hope, he makes it his mission to create Shadow to be a bringer of peace and good health. This further steeled Gerald's resolve to save Maria from her illness, no matter the cost. He continued research and development of the Gizoid alongside Shadow. It turns out the name Gizoid means everything in the ancient language of the Fourth Great Civilization. He also noticed how it kept repeating the word link, then explaining,
"Show me your true strength, and I shall obey. I am all things, and all shall belong to me."
And so the machine was brought to watch the professor fire off his model guns. From there, the Gizoid formed its link and refused to listen to anyone but him. Realizing how this could be dangerous in the wrong hands, the professor began researching how to re-establish a link. Meanwhile, progress on Project Shadow was soon to be complete, but the top dogs started to go into a frenzy. It seemed more and more like they wanted the project shut down, despite their earlier pestering. But Gerald couldn't stop now, especially with how close at hand a cure for Maria was. In order to buy some time, he handed the Gizoid over to the upper management and commanded it to never absorb any of their weapons. But that didn't stop the other researchers from doing this, giving the professor the realization that a link can be re-established by exposing the Gizoid to a higher power. The upper echelon still wasn't satisfied with this, so Gerald would develop another weapon, codenamed the Eclipse Cannon. By tapping into the Ark's central reactor, it would fire a blast capable of destroying the world. Of course, this meant that it couldn't actually be used, all part of the plan. That and the fact that it could be used to deal with the Black Arms once they returned. The further Shadow was developed, the more powerful he would become when waking up, and Maria understood that he'd be strained. So, she created the concept for the limiter rings, which would help Shadow contain and focus his power as long as they stay on his wrists. She also came up with the idea for his air shoes to help with mobility. These would be developed and implemented into the final design, and Gerald also wanted to research the phenomenon known as Chaos Control, an ability granted by the Emeralds that allows the user to warp space and time. He would implement this knowledge into Shadow before he awakens, so he wouldn't have to learn it by himself. Gerald felt as though he was beginning to run out of time though. Between the growing rift in his family, Gunn's demands, the president, and the threat of the Black Arms, the professor had a lot on his plate. But then, it was complete. Shadow had finally awakened, and come out a healthy and intelligent being, a far cry from the monster lizard they had to seal away. Even better is his relationship with Maria. They quickly grew close as she acted as his guide to the world. He helped her to feel better on those days where sickness took hold, and they even attended classes together. They had become inseparable, and shared a desire to visit the Earth. For Shadow, it'd be his first time on the planet, where he hopes he can fully realize his mission to bring hope to humanity, especially as he can be self-loathing due to his Black Arms DNA. This would give him a newfound sense of purpose and belonging, contrasting the researchers who feared him, none more than the young Abraham Tower, who witnessed Shadow's creation with the help of Doom and saw him as a monster. It was Maria that reminded him of what really mattered, his heart, which she believes in without a shred of doubt. Seeing their relationship gave Gerald motivation as he remembered why he's doing what he does. Back on Earth, a new baby was born into the family, the daughter of one of the greatest archaeologists and sister of Maria. Let's just say the apple didn't fall far from the tree, although thankfully she didn't inherit Maria's condition. But this all read to Gerald as confirmation that his sons had lost complete faith in him. He turned to Shadow, the key to solving all his stresses. While Shadow and Maria were observing the Aurora Borealis, a violent attack stirred up. The Gizoid absorbed too many weapons and began rampaging through the facility. The android nearly took out the professor himself in the commotion, but was thwarted by Shadow, who could match and surpass it in combat. After which, the researchers came to subdue it and seal it away. Gerald deciphered the rest of the stone tablet, which stated, when the Gizoid had learned all that it could, it became a god of wrath. and all was destroyed. Realizing how much of a liability this thing was, he decided to try to reprogram its AI into a free-willed and emotions-based model. If it was kept the same, who knows what would happen if it were to absorb all 7 Chaos Emeralds. Following the Gizoid's attack, the artificial Chaos went on a rampage, but were quickly stopped by Shadow. He raced around the Ark, helping all the wounded researchers who endured both attacks. An SOS was sent out to Gunn automatically, and they'd begin preparations to go up there and shut down the entire operation. By now, the Gizoid's reprogramming was complete, and Gerald noted how he gave 2 of the most powerful life forms a soul. But his belief is that their hearts are what will give them their strength. And so, as a final tweak to the android, he gave the command, "Bring hope to humanity!" to awaken its full power and emotions. In the event that the Gizoid will lose all of its senses and turn into a killing machine again, another backup program was installed. But now, time was up. Gunn and the President were unimpressed with the results of Gerald's work and reprimanded his methods, mostly his collaboration with an alien warlord. They believed him to be a madman, and so the facility was stormed by the military and Gerald was imprisoned for his crimes. The raid continued as the soldiers apprehended researchers and in some cases used lethal force, leading to the biggest, most tragic accident.
Maria!
In their attempt to use one of the escape pods to evacuate down to Earth, Maria was shot, likely taking a bullet intended for Shadow. Before he even realized what had happened, she already pushed him into the capsule and made her way to the control panel. There, she would give her last words, reminding Shadow to give the people of the Earth a chance to be happy, to bring them peace. He tried to stop her, to save her, to do anything, but was ejected as Maria collapsed, dead. Shadow was recovered by the military, who continued to allow Gerald to work on him under strict supervision. The professor learned of the incident on the Ark, praying for the safety of his colleagues, and most of all, his dear granddaughter. Then, it all came crashing down when he saw her name amongst the list of casualties on the raid. This, combined with the fact that it felt he'd already lost everything and was trapped in a vicious cycle, finally broke him. He couldn't control his thoughts anymore, and gave in to insanity. All he knew now was that he wanted to end this, end his suffering, end the humanity that caused it. Shadow was finally completed, no more tests needed, but Gerald made sure to do one last thing. He brainwashed Shadow, manipulating his memories of Maria's final wish and having him carry out his revenge. He put his ultimate life to sleep, with the promise that those who wish to awaken it will bring about the total destruction of mankind. At the same time, he began to remotely create a program on the low that would cause the Ark to fall into the Earth if all 7 emeralds were placed into the Eclipse cannon. He even had it set up so the biolizard sealed below deck would merge with the cannon to speed up the Ark's collision course. This was all feverishly calculated by the mad scientist, scrawling all over the walls of his cell. Eventually, the military decided enough was enough, and allowing Gerald Robotnik to live any longer posed a huge risk. So, he was allowed a final message. A message where he condemned humanity to death for all that they had taken from him, explaining how his justice will be carried out. After that, he no longer had anything to say or anything to give, and so the footage cut out as the firing squad behind the camera executed Gerald. His life brutally ended in gunfire. All that was left behind were his scorned legacy, his 2 greatest projects kept in gun confinement, and his family who had all but disowned him. As it happens, around the time of his death was when his grandson was born to the robotics expert son. Young Ivor Robotnik grew up idolizing his grandpa and all the amazing feats of science he accomplished. More than likely, he saw the execution of such a brilliant mind as a crime, and would go on to resent humanity as a result. He also just couldn't understand all the love Maria got despite the fact that he was alive and well. To him, it felt like a ghost was getting more attention, and so, in the interest of being recognized and continuing his grandfather's legacy, he would begin building something of his own. But that's a story for the next episode. Just 10 years before the events of the present day, the Solaris project was kicked off by the Duke of Soliana. He had lost his wife, the mother of his daughter Elise, and believed the sun god of time would suffice to bring her back. So, the flame of hope that symbolized the country's faith and prosperity would become the subject of this experiment. As the flame grew, he took Princess Elise to see it, telling her how this flame would let her see her mother again. After they left the room, Elise from 10 years into the future would appear alongside Sonic the Hedgehog himself. The two extinguished the flames, preventing the experiment from ever happening. The flames were wiped from existence, along with everyone's memories of the events that would take place 10 years in the future. For all intents and purposes, everything I'm going to tell you next technically does not happen. We established last episode that 06 is canon, but its events are wiped from the timeline once the flame is blown out. I'm still going to cover them anyway so you have the full context, but you can consider this next section as a kind of alternate timeline. So, in this timeline where the flame wasn't blown out and the experiment proceeded, things were looking promising for a while. During one test, however, Solaris, the being whose essence was contained within the flame, let out an electromagnetic pulse. The resulting spatial meltdown caused an explosion that would gravely injure the Duke as he shielded Elise, who was knocked out cold. Luckily for them, the now awakened Shadow and Silver had just travelled back to this time. They went on to seal the two halves of Solaris that had just escaped containment, the fiery and powerful being known as Iblis, and the manipulative force of darkness known as Mephiles. Future Shadow sealed Mephiles in the scepter given to him by the Duke, with the malicious entity promising to remember his name and form. He also told Shadow of his certain and impending death. Meanwhile, Future Silver, with the help of the Duke and a single Chaos Emerald, seals Iblis's flames within the princess. If she were ever to cry or be overwhelmed with emotions, the flames would be released and devastate the world. The Duke died and the two hedgehogs went back to the present, but not before Silver gifted her the blue Chaos Emerald he was carrying, the same one she's seen with 10 years into the future. Yeah, so major plot hole to address here. There are effectively two blue emeralds existing at the same point in time for 10 years. There's the one out in the wild somewhere, the present blue Chaos Emerald, and the one Elise has. We'll call it the future blue Chaos Emerald. So the present blue emerald still exists for all the events that happened prior to 06 in the present day of this timeline. Silver then finds the present blue emerald, well, in the present, at an Eggman base, and this becomes the future blue emerald once he takes it back into the past and gives it Elise. Confused? You're gonna love the other ways 06's plot confuses the timeline, but just remember, the events of this game have no bearing on our actual main timeline. Again, really just including it to give you the full context. Anyway, the aquatic base laboratory and the old castle in Kingdom Valley would be abandoned after this incident, and the royal family relocated to Soleanna Castletown. Elise was forced to grow up quickly on her own, showing little emotion but still caring for her people, as she inherited the kingdom from her late father. In our main timeline, she ended up becoming the sovereign anyway, suggesting that the Duke died at some point despite Project Solaris having never happened. Maybe from natural causes, he did seem kinda old anyway, even when Elise was young. And with that, we're just about ready to tackle the main events of the games themselves, but I just want to cover some things I suspect took place before Sonic's first adventure. Most of these have no real time frame attached to them, so you can basically place them anywhere, realistically after the fourth great civilization fell. First, the 1001 stories of the Arabian Nights were written, and its stories created an alternate reality. The world of the Arabian Nights is essentially a collection of universes coming together. One of the characters in the book, the Eraser Jinn, was a force of malicious intent and was sealed away in a magic lamp as punishment for his actions. He would remain trapped until he granted the wishes of 1,000 people, but this would take ages in and of itself. There's also the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Not much is known about the early history of this world, but the main events kick off when King Arthur appears. He was an illusion created by the wizard Merlin for the purpose of bringing peace and prosperity to the kingdom. Arthur was given surrogate parents, but he was then taken by Merlin to be raised by Sir Ector. Merlin then embedded in stone the sacred sword Caliburn, with only the true King of England being able to pull it. Arthur, after some years had passed, was the only one ever able to pull it out. This instantly gave him the title of the ruler of England. He became a benevolent ruler and an excellent knight, which earned him the respect of his people. At some point in his youth, he ended up breaking his sacred sword, which led him on a quest with Merlin to the deep woods. They sailed out into the lake in a clearing and met with Nemu, the Lady of the Lake. She was the owner of Excalibur and its scabbard, which she deemed him worthy to bestow upon. With the help of this great sword and his newfound immortality, he was able to save his kingdom many times. Later in his rule, he gathered together his Knights of the Round Table, Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, and Sir Percival. Lancelot and Gawain were rivals, not often seeing eye to eye, and Percival would go on a legendary quest for the Holy Grail. The scabbard of Excalibur's bewitching power became too much for even Arthur to resist. He became a ruthless tyrant and took on a new alias, the Black Knight, and would subjugate his own people. He would also summon the Knights of the Underworld to do his dirty work, all of which quickly plunged the kingdom into despair. The light of Excalibur was lost, and it split into the 4 sacred swords, and in its place was a twisted version of itself known as the Death Caliber. The Knights of the Round Table continued to stay loyal to him, and would come into possession of the 4 sacred swords. Merlin passed on at some point, leaving his granddaughter Merlina to be appointed the royal wizard. She desperately wanted to save the kingdom from terror, and took it upon herself to look into the future of the realm of the story. Seeing the disaster of how it all ends, she gained a newfound existential dread and plans to retrieve the scabbard from the king. With it, she would honor her grandfather's wish of an eternal kingdom, a world that never ends, all so she could prevent its terrible fate. Now for a quickfire round. The last Echidnas died out, leaving only Knuckles himself. Similar story with the Babylonians and the Babylon Rogues. On that note, Sonic, his friends, and most of the people currently alive would have been born, and Ivo Robotnik got his doctorate, becoming a full-time villain, but not before considering getting a teaching degree, thus directly kicking off the main events. So stay tuned for the next episode to find out what order those events really happened. Best way to make sure you don't miss it is to subscribe. You watched up to the end to be hearing this anyway, so no reason not to hit that button at this point. Likes and shares are also appreciated, but I also want to hear from you. Let me know how you think the timeline of the main games goes, or if you think I got something wrong here. I also stream here most days of the week as well as on Twitch, so feel free to follow me on there too. Otherwise, have a good one, and until next time.